Thank you for tuning in to another Studio GDT Reviews. Tonight is going to be the first episode of an equipment and upgrades section. These reviews are going to be focused on ancillary equipment to swords or upgrading swords themselves, with a focus in kenjutsu, iaido, and Japanese swordsmanship in general. So some reviews are going to be one-offs, some might have some follow-up over time, but the general format of these are going to be far less structured than the sword reviews and more of kind of a conversation with it. So to open up our first review tonight, we're going to be taking a look at the ShadowDancer Premium Tsuka. So this is a Tsuka that is available and configurable from ShadowDancer with swords or purchased after the fact. And we're going to be talking about that in a minute here. The first thing that I would want to start off with is what's the price of something like this? And I'm going to come right out of the gate and I'm going to say it's anywhere from, depending on your configurations and if you're getting it with a sword, what that sword comes with, or if you're buying it by itself as a standalone replacement Tsuka, it's anywhere from $300 to $600. Some of you might be having some sticker shock there with that $600 price tag, but allow me to explain. So if you recall, a while back we reviewed the 1095 Shashikomi Suguha Hamon sword from ShadowDancer, and it was a gorgeous, fantastic blade that had a quality and air about it, and the whole package was fantastic. If there could have been any one criticism about that sword, it would be in the Tsuka section. The Tsuka had a great shape. It was maki, but it did use artificial silk. It did have the entry-level Hishigami, and there was a little bit of a room for improvement in the tightness of it. They do have a few different levels of Hishigami, so that could have been an option. But even if you got it tighter, you still have the artificial silk, as well as the channeled same of immature nature, right? Or young, however you want to call it. Smaller nodules, right? Genuine, but smaller nodules. So if you were purchasing a sword from ShadowDancer and you wanted something a little bit more robust, something a little bit more attractive, you would have the ability to order a premium Tsuka. Or if you had already purchased something like this 1095 Shashikomi sword and you later wanted to upgrade to it, that is an option. ShadowDancer recently put out a video that talked about how they prefer to do mass-produced swords. I don't like saying mass-produced because there's a certain connotation with if something's mass-produced, there's a lower quality behind it. So let's just say off-the-shelf or standardized production, right? They prefer standardized production because they have better quality control, standard sets of dimensions, right? Somebody's not adding a half an inch to something, which then screws up any extra parts that you get in. And it also opens up options for upgrades down the line. What do I mean by that? Well, think of this sword, the 1095 sword that we're talking about, as a base model performance car. Is there the off-the-shelf hot rod one with all the bells and whistles ready to go? Sure, you got the money for that though. If you don't, maybe you get into it so you have it and you start having fun, and then as time provides and funds allow, you upgrade. So with this particular sword, the blade is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it at all. There's nothing that needs to be changed with it at all. The saya, the same. The tsuba, the same. Really, again, only the Tsuka. So I take a look at this. I purchase a sword. I'm paying $450 to $490 depending on the configuration. Later on down the line, when I'm ready to go for the big bling in my Tsuka, I'm now spending anywhere from $300 to $600. I get said Tsuka, and I'm able to take my previous one off, and due to the standardized nature of all these, I can take this premium Tsuka and pop it right on. No fitting, it's just drop in. And that's exactly what I did with this. I removed the original Tsuka that came with it, which had some good fittings. We talked about the downsides of it earlier, and I was able to immediately pop this on with no finagling or hassle whatsoever. It was incredible. And then the sword completely changed. So let's talk a little bit about the Tsuka itself now and what makes this particular one in this configuration different. So the first thing that you will see are the fittings. The fittings are extremely high quality. This particular design, I can't recall the name of it. However, you will see it often duplicated in Longshuan. But you'll see very, very differing levels of quality of this exact same design. You'll see some that are just painted. You'll see some where the etching or the hollows are extremely rough, filled with debris, burrs, or they're not very deep. So in some areas, the design doesn't make itself present. If you take a look at these, it is done with an extreme level of precision, and there isn't a single flaw on it whatsoever. So I think they did an excellent job in the Fuchi and Kashira that they selected to go along with this. Next thing we'll look at is the Same itself. This Same is completely different quality than every other ShadowDancer sword that I've looked at. In fact, it's a completely different other quality than the 16 plus swords that I have on the wall. Now, I've never paid for upgraded Same quality from anybody before, so that's not to say that it's not available elsewhere, but it was quite a shock when I took this out of its box and I looked at it and I said, wow, that's the good stuff. That's what it's supposed to look like. It is a full wrap done in the Maru-gise method, which will have a visible seam down the private side, right? The non-public facing side, and that is a traditional method of it. So some people may cry foul if they see a full wrap and they see a seam and they say, well, that's not how they do it. That's actually quite the contrary. There's a seam, there's a few, well, I shouldn't say a few, there's many different ways that a full wrap can be done, but probably the most common, because it is the easiest, right, but still using a large amount of skin itself, is the Maru-gise, which has the seam down the middle. You'll notice the nodules are quite large, and then we move down to where the Emperor node is, and it's just this massive section of looks like jewels, right? It makes me think of the jewel of an iguana is what it looks like. Again, I've never seen anything like this before, so it was quite impressive. The Same itself has been antiqued so that it doesn't have the raw color that you typically see out there, and gives it a little bit of aging to this and makes the whole thing look more authentic, in my opinion. This is not an inexpensive part, so again, we're talking about $600 in net sticker shock. A decent chunk of that's coming in the cost for this ray skin itself, right? And when you look at the skin of a ray itself, there's one Emperor node, right? It's in one part, so you cut and include that, then the rest of the pieces of that ray are going to be for significantly smaller swords or channeled pieces or whatnot. And the nodules on those would be relatively smaller. Moving on to the Ito itself, this is genuine silk Ito. And now that I've felt it, I'm going to have an extremely hard time going back to anything else. That's just the way that it is. You'll notice it's also done in a Jabara maki style wrap. This is definitely done in a very precise way with Hishigami, and it is rock solid. I mean, it just will not move at all. And I especially like the the crossover points on this because they have a ridge that just with the Hinerimaki I just don't necessarily feel quite as strong, and it's almost like, some people might not like this, but I do, it's almost like there's solid pieces in those ridges and those knots, but it is fantastic in the hands, and it feels like it would provide plenty of grip when the hands got real sweaty and maybe they started to slide against the material itself, because that always does happen as well. The Manuki that are present are a nice quality Manuki. I don't know if I've seen them offered on other swords. That's probably the least expensive aspect of this, and something that could be changed relatively easy. But what you're really looking at is the fact that this is at the $600 mark, This is a full Tsuka that's been hand carved to fit the wrap of the high quality tsame, which is going to have different thickness as well. So you can't just take a Tsuka, wrap it in the tsame, and expect everything to be right. You might have to sand the Tsuka down more to be able to get the appropriate dimensions. We still have Haichi shape. It is slightly less pronounced than in the channeled model. That is to be expected, but it's not like the generic full wrapped ray skin handles that you see out there where they have no shape. They're just like a shaft, right? There's no Haichi, there's no Riko, it's just kind of a baseball bat. So they were able to retain the appropriate profiling on this as well. So for someone like me that would have a budget in mind, but also doesn't, have plans to necessarily dump a ton of money into Nihonto or real high-end stuff, I think having an option like this is a great option. It allows you to get started in class or get started in practice with a nice high-quality sword. And then if you want to work on the dress-up, so to speak, that you can do that over time, right? You could take this sword, you could eventually get this premium Tsuka on it, and then you could find yourself an antique Tsuba, and you've got something that looks fantastic. Because let's face it, if you're going to get a brand new production Nihonto with brand new Koshire, you're going to be out a whole lot more than $600, right? You're in that 8 to 10 grand plus range at that point. So then you look at antiques. Well, if you get antiques, you're looking at something that's 300 years old, right? 400 years old, 500 years old. It's not going to look this nice. Sure, it's going to be silk, but is it going to feel as nice as brand new silk? Probably not, right? How much are you really going to use it in class? Is it primarily going to be more for presentation or decoration or enbus or whatnot? So I think this is an extremely valid option. And excuse me, I had some sticker shock initially myself, but then I thought about the labor of carving the Tsuka core. Then I thought about the cost of the Tsamegawa. Then I thought about the cost of the silk. And then I thought about the labor involved in doing it all together. And I said, that's probably right about where it should be. So take a look at it or inquire about it, because it's not necessarily something that you can configure on their website. They do have some swords that are going to have it with it already, and that's where you can get some discounts too. If you have a sword that originally came with genuine silk Ito but doesn't have the high-end Tsame on it, your upcharge would be less, because basically the cost of the silk has already been figured into the cost of the sword. So that's why I can't tell you specifically it's X amount of dollars. There's a range, and that range is anywhere between $300 to $600. So I imagine if you're dealing with a sword that had, came with the real silk in its configuration, you'd probably be looking at the $300 category there, and you'd have it. I don't think that's that much. Sure, there are people that rewrap Tsuka out there. There are people that create Tsuka out there, but one, are they going to take your job? Do they have time to take your job? What all are they doing on it? And then how much are you spending? You're probably going to be spending for the ground up, someone to create something for you from scratch, close to the same amount of money. And you're going to have to send them your sword, right? So again, that's where this kind of off-the-shelf base model really comes into play. And I think it's a cool thing that they do. And, if I ended up acquiring more ShadowDancer swords, it's definitely something I could see myself doing, because once you look at the Tsame on this, and then you go back and look at everything else, it can't compare. It does not compare. So thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Equipments and Upgrades, and I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a little bit rambly. It's our first time. It'll get better, I promise. Have a great evening.
Studio GDT reviews are made possible by the following sponsors: